Hi guys, welcome to Monitoring and Evaluation Made Simple. I'm your host, Coach Alexander. Today we're going to be looking at how has the COVID-19 impacted globally, but more especially on the NGO fraternity. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is because we have to really look at things the way they are. We don't want to sugarcoat what is already there, because once we sugarcoat things, we end up being the ones to lose. And I know I'm not the only one who's been in the NGO fraternity, but I'm also in the monitoring and evaluation, which is directly linked to non-governmental organizations and their work, because M&E is an important component of all the activities that they do. So I'm on this website. It's called the World Economic Forum, and this website is among the many other websites that have been talking about the COVID and its impact on the NGO funding. And as you can see, it's quite recent. This was written in 2nd April 2020. So we're going to read it through just briefly and try to brainstorm what does this own. So they're saying here that how to reform NGO funding so we can deal with threats like the COVID-19. Okay, in essence, what they're just saying is, what can we do now to control the threat of the COVID-19? Of course, they're saying threat as if it's universal, but they are really talking about what is happening at present. So let's read just briefly and try to brainstorm. It says here, coronavirus has triggered a funding crisis for NGOs when they needed it the most. Okay, by the way, this is I've just started reading this article. I didn't read it before, so you and I, we are reading it together for the first time, so we'll brainstorm upon it. So again, it continues, the economic downturn means future aid budgets and donations are likely to decline. A liquidity fund could help NGOs cover overheads in the short term. We all knew that this pandemic is unprecedented in scale and need. Almost every household, community, organization, sector, and nation is reeling from its impacts on health, the economy, and society. Our world has fundamentally changed. Okay, so now already we can see the impact just by what has been written. You see, the coronavirus, as we all know, like looking at the first point, as we all know that NGOs globally, whichever area they are operating in, they're usually funded by, it could be international agencies like the USAID, or it could be Swedish International Development Agency. These pumping huge amounts of money so that activities can be operated. Now, because of this crisis, it has created a very difficult situation in these donors, these governments. Because take for instance, like the United States of America, they have the USAID wing, the agency that offers grants to NGOs around the world. So these USAID projects are certainly going to be affected because the government has had to shift their priorities from offering donor aided money to countries in need to helping now their own people control the COVID-19. And as you have seen, this is really a big task, big problem, because the governments, like if you look at the USA, what has happened? If you've been following the news, a lot of people have lost jobs. Over 6 million people have had to file in unemployment claims to the government so that they are able to access benefits during the period when there's unemployment. So the government has, the US government pumped in $2 trillion, okay, $2 trillion to curb the effects of unemployment, to curb the issues of companies shutting down, Everything is just going crazy. So now that 2 trillion, okay, is just a drop in the ocean because their whole economy is a yearly $22 trillion GDP. That is the equivalent. Now you can imagine 2 trillion to cover not for 1 month, but for 3, 4 months. That is what the government was saying. So you can already see that because of this situation, government priorities will shift drastically because one, they are going to be pumping in money for research into a vaccine. Two, they'll have to be looking after the medical personnel, you know, buying protective equipment and also buying the masks, and then there are also other issues to do with what else? What was the ventilators? Yes, that is a really huge cost. Okay, people dying. I was very disturbed this morning when on BBC I was watching how the US now have started burying certain fractions of the dead from these victims of this in mass graves. And I thought that was something of the 1900s, but it has resurfaced today, which is quite disturbing. So what does this mean? It means that definitely aid and the economic downturn means future aid budgets and donations are likely to decline. Actually, it's not even in the future. It's going to happen anytime soon. Because let me give you an example. If your own house, if you're a parent, you live in your own house with children, wife and kids, okay? And then you've been giving funds, giving money to relatives who are in need. And then a crisis happens in your home. What will happen to that money you were giving to your relatives in need? Will you continue giving that money? If it was, let's say, $10,000, just for an example, and a crisis happens in your home, will you continue aiding your relatives? Will you have that luxury? The answer is no, because it's certainly going to cut immediately. And this is what we may be seeing anytime from now, that the donor money, of course, there are these agreements which have been made. But what I'm foreseeing is that priority, of course, yes, the governments will continue funding, but there will have to be some budget cuts. That is going to happen. It's definitely going to happen. There'll be budget cuts. And what this will mean is that the money that will be coming to the donor organizations will not be the same. It will be cut. So what that will mean is that activities that will be implemented by NGOs, including M&D activities, are going to be cut. Okay. So now, this is something I need to also know. Okay, before I get to that point, it further says liquidity fund could help NGOs cover overheads in the short term. So here they've clearly mentioned in the short term. So what this means is that it really depends on how liquid these NGOs are around the world. Of course, they've been getting money from the donors, but when the donors, like the governments, suspend funding, okay, or maybe cut funding, what these NGOs had in their basket, they'll have to live off, maybe for lack of a better term, they'll have to live off from their savings. But this can only cover them in the short term. Now, looking at things the way it is realistically, the situation is that the COVID-19, according to what scientists are saying, the vaccine can only be ready a year from now. And that is, for them, that is being extremely ambitious, because they are saying that usually the vaccine takes 5 to 10 years to, you know, you know what I mean. It takes 5 to 10 years to have a vaccine. So this is pretty scary. So now let's just go on to read. Maybe we don't even need to read everything. It says we also know that Populations are affected by conflict, and those trapped in states of fragility and protracted crises such as Yemen, Syria, and the Democratic will be especially vulnerable to the impact of the corona health and economic effects, certainly, but also risks to social order and cohesion. Okay, I think this is self-explanatory. Okay, so what does this all mean? I don't want to make this video long, because if we make it long, it becomes less valuable, because I know you have a lot of things to do. Yeah, but what does this all mean? So it means that really it's the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. In my view, there are two things they can do here. If the governments, if the donors cut funding, you know, I think that's okay. That is expected, because a cut in funding will simply mean that activities will have to be suspended. So in this case, in order for the non-governmental organizations to protect their staff, they shouldn't quickly go into the idea of saying, let us fire or lay off workers. Okay, they shouldn't rush to that direction. Okay, perhaps the best way is to keep the staff, all right, and then maybe cut on activities, because I mean, what could you even be implementing with this COVID-19? It's, you can't go into the communities because of the social distancing. So it's better that keep the staff, don't lay them off, just cut the activities. Now the problem comes in um, if the funding is suspended, and that is where now NGOs need to come together. I feel they need to come together and discuss this issue with the, maybe lobby with the backdoor donors to try and find a way they can both sustain. Because at this point in time, when there's the COVID-19 pandemic, it wouldn't help anyone to lose a job, because how do they, without any income, how will they really control the negative effects of this pandemic? Okay, so this is all I wanted to discuss about, but I think I'm going to release another video just to further talk about this impact. If you have any comments, please don't hesitate to put your comments in the comment section, and also don't hesitate to subscribe to this channel. I've been your host, Coach Alexander, and see you on the other side. Bye.